Wow, it's amazing. You know, we have fewer people around this weekend, but those of you who are here are very attentive. All right, have a seat. Welcome to part 3 of our 5-part series. This is the last of the really somber focus on Atul Gawande's book and the mortality that goes with it, although the rest of the season actually is mindful of it. So welcome back, those of you who have been gone. You're going to jump right into the end of it. I was going to say in the middle of it, but really into the end of it. But I will back up a little bit and catch you up. But first, a little bit more reflection on the news. You were in Florida during this shooting. I don't know how that impacts your...
That was something else.
Yeah. We actually were very close to it the day before.
Yeah.
We were
down in West Palm Beach, and it happened just south of West Palm Beach.
Yeah.
So this was in the comics this past week on the 27th. Well, that's my observation is the leadership on this in this moment seems to be coming from different quarters. Yeah. You will have seen, of course, Dix and others have followed suit. LL Bean, even Walmart has made some adjustments. Weimart.
Fred Myers.
Yeah, Fred Myers.
So,
Delta and United.
a number of corporate sponsors that have taken off. I was rather appalled. Delta, of course, announced it was going to sever the corporate status, and there was an immediate outcry locally that its tax benefits that it had received from the state might be, or maybe they did act to revoke it, I don't know, but they at least threatened to revoke their tax status. And it's like, wow, does the NRA have somebody in their pocket? If that's the immediate reaction to a corporation making a corporate
Well,
decision.
then I read something that said only 13 people had ever taken advantage of that discount.
Really?
Yeah.
There were very, very few people, NRA people that ever used that discount.
So,
It's the symbolism.
but it is an interesting moment, it seems to me, and this may be the difference between this and some of our other experiences of such gun violence is where the leadership seems to be coming from.
Yep.
This was an ENS, Episcopal News Service, story about teens, not adults, lead Episcopalians in gun violence protests and marches. Of course, bishops united against gun violence has been rather mobilized in recent years, to good effect, I think. So it's not that the leadership isn't involved, but it's a unique moment to celebrate some leadership that's broader based and pretty profound, I think.
It's my understanding there's going to be a march here in Bend also on the 24th.
Yes, there is.
Oh.
Your magic!
Rick, you just projected onto the screen, yes. March 24th across the nation, and this was again sparked by the students from Parkland, Florida. But that's a nationwide activism, and so locally at 11:30 on March the 24th, there will be a March for Our Lives event starting at Drake Park with some speakers, I think student speakers. And then a march that goes forth from there. That's March 24th, and the timing actually, for the benefit of those of us who might want to participate, is really, I think, poignant and helpful. The Altar Guild will be meeting earlier that day. It's the Saturday, the day before Palm Sunday. So the Altar Guild will be mobilized that day to do palm crosses and celebrating Palm/Passion Sunday. And that's that's going on in the morning. And the fact that it starts at 11:30 means we can do that, those of us who want to gather here to make palm crosses, and then walk down to Drake Park and participate in that. So I'm really, from a very personal standpoint, pleased at the timing and the way it works. And I think it's an apt entree into Holy Week. So that's an invitation. That's an event which I've linked on our Facebook page at Trinity, but if you don't have access to Facebook, if you Google March for Our Lives, March 24 March, March 24, March, Central Oregon. If you Google that, you're going to probably find a link to this pretty easily, I would think. And we'll have a little bit of information. I
It is a
think
special day. It's my
I snuck something into the bulletin at the very last minute. So I think even in this morning's bulletin, there's a reference, and I trust as space allows in our bulletin, which is sometimes hard, but as space allows, I'll continue that reminder to invite us to take a part in that.
Jed, this is your chance to get arrested.
I don't see that this is an event where people get arrested. I think this is intended to be a very somber.
Unless you're packing guns.
So that is, as many of you now know, that is Rick's dream.
You get
I get arrested.
I want my priest arrested.
Meanwhile, yeah, that's right, for the right reasons, let's be clear. Oh my gosh. I actually was in a neighboring congregation in Illinois when the priest was arrested for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And that's terrible. That's terrible. So for the right reasons, thank you. The women, meanwhile, have been on retreat, are on retreat, many of them. A couple of you have come back. Thank you for being here. But they're having a good time, I hear.
It's awesome. It's really good.
The speaker was,
Is that the speaker there?
Yeah,
well worth
Jane
it.
Kirkpatrick.
I think that's cake, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, I don't know who let the man in.
He did our Tai Chi.
I know who he is. I recognize that profile. He comes here twice a week and leads Tai Chi. So, good. Attendance at the early service was down. I rather expect attendance at the later service will be down. Being mortal, weeks 1 and 2 have happened. We're using Atul Gawande's book and actually focus particularly on the video. And as I've mentioned in the past, there is a difference between the book and the video. If you've read the book is much more focused, I think, on aging and what it might mean to live as we age, whereas the video is very much focused on dying. If you just like the spirit of Atul Gawande, and I don't know how you couldn't like the spirit of Atul Gawande, if you just like the spirit of him, I'd suggest find the book and pick it up and read it, because it's really, it's very readable, it's very engaging, it's very thought-provoking. I had thought actually at one time about maybe making it the Lenten book group series, but it didn't seem to fit that. But it is certainly worth a read and worth some discussion if you found a way to do that. So reactions to last week. I've got a few questions I'm going to prod you with if you don't have anything to say. But first, before I go there, do you have anything to add? Okay. Well, let me prompt you with some observations or questions. That was, I think, one of the quotes from last week. There's no natural moment for conversations like this, except when a crisis comes, and then it's too late.
So you have to make it intentional.
So you have to make it awkward and intentional.
Correct.
Yeah.
10 points to the women.
10 points to Peggy. Yay! So the couple of year and a half ago, and there was some brief mention last year, but we didn't repeat it. A year and a half ago in the fall, we talked about the Conversation Project. And we're going to repeat some of that somehow in this coming fall too. And the idea of the fall is to prompt people to really be intentional about it. And to think about what you want to do before you go and have holiday visits, family coming in. So before Thanksgiving, before Christmas, when families naturally get together, might be a really good time for someone to take the lead in having some conversations, for which there is no convenient time. So, but you don't have to wait till the fall. 4th of July, you could do it too. Memorial Day, I don't know, someone's birthday. Last week, I particularly was aware of, and we briefly mentioned it, that there are some challenges on the medical side of it. Doctors will tell patients things that patients do not hear. And I know that there are doctors who make a point of saying the same thing more than once for that reason. I know it's really good to have somebody go in with you when you see a doctor, especially if you're sick or scared or if the news is bad, because someone with you can hear things that you can't hear. Now that said, if you're really close with the person, neither one of you might hear it, but at least there's a better chance that you'll hear it if you're with somebody. So patients don't hear what doctors say. That's an observation that comes from the medical side of things. I think it's a fair one. I noticed last week the woman lying in bed, when the team came around her and sort of laid out before her just what her dire situation was, her first response was, well, miracles happen.
Yes.
And so too the other gentleman, and we're going to see the very end of that story. I'm going to back up a little bit and lead into today. They did very little until it was really late, because he too was hoping that one more treatment, one experimental treatment that he saw online was going to make the difference for him. And of course it didn't in that case. So, I always pray for a miracle. If I'm with somebody and they just want a miracle, I will pray for that miracle every time.
But when it gets to the point when people realize that the miracle probably isn't going to come, they learn to hope for other things. And sometimes the hope is just for a day without pain, or another day, the ability to talk to a relative or a friend or somebody they love. There's always something to hope for.
Yep, absolutely. And another, it's kind of the flip, or part of the same side. If patients don't hear what they say, doctors also need to be mindful of the fact, doctors, nurses, medical folk, need to be mindful of the fact that they need to ask some things that they don't ask either. So if we don't ask, we don't know. If we don't ask what's going on with the patient, we don't know. If we don't ask what the patient wants, we don't know. So that's challenges from the medical teams, from the perspective of medical teams. And then it occurs to me, I also noticed some of the challenges from the perspective of patients and families. There was Karen, I think, made the observation that she really didn't like was it a neuro-oncologist, the young doctor who was dealing with the man. I think we're going to see her just briefly still today, maybe. She really didn't like her, which I thought was really unfair. I thought she was fine. But Karen wasn't alone in that. There were others who didn't like her either. But part of it, I think, is just a mindfulness that sometimes patients have to have that conversation. Patients have to lead the way. That goes back a little bit to the awkward conversations. All right, so anyhow, those were some observations I took out of last week. Anything else? All right, well, here we are, week 3 of Being Mortal. And let's do the video, shall we? A little bit shorter segment today to finish up the video. And then when we're back, we'll debrief some more. So let's go ahead and get back into it. And I think I have the sound better this time than I did last week. We'll see. We'll hear. Yes, ma'am.
I felt the last sentence of the movie was very important. That's what gives meaning to so many people if they view life in that way. Yeah.
His interpretation of that is not a Christian one.
No, but
Doesn't make it wrong. It's not ours.
Yeah.
It may not be yours. It may not be mine. What are you doing here? I thought you were gone today.
No, I'm here.
Welcome back. Okay. So, yeah.
Yes, Tom.
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 I have a question, or
kind of an observation from just before you started this. When you were mentioning Karen's reaction to that woman doctor, isn't that true though with everything? I mean, our interpretation or how it affects us, whether
We're inherently subjective.
everybody's
beings,
different.
So
Yeah,
that doctor may have worked just fine for me.
right.
Clearly, would not have been a good choice for Karen. Wouldn't have been a good choice for Barb,
Yeah.
whom I associate most, because she also didn't like her much.
Isn't that being, we're being judgmental? That's how we do with everybody somehow or other.
Yeah, I mean, judgmental has a lot of negative connotations to it, and it usually is. Judgment, however,
Yeah,
is appropriate. Discernment, judgment, subjective responses are very appropriate to pay attention to. So yeah, if you're dealing with a physician and it's not the right physician for you, especially at such a critical point, then by all means, you should feel entirely free to make a change.
oh, yeah.
Could you or Karen tell us what you didn't like because we weren't here?
Oh. I've got to, let me regroup. I've had a crazy morning. Gosh, I'm
Part of it,
sorry.
I'll
My
tell you,
morning's
part
so
of Barb
screwed
and I-
up I can't get
yeah,
there.
Barb
so
and I
that's
talked
okay.
about it a little bit, and Barb didn't feel like she was sincere. So it just didn't feel real to her. It felt like she was working really hard to go through the motions that she didn't really feel. So again, that's a kind of subjective response. Was it fair to her? Maybe yes, maybe not. But for Barb, for Karen, it wouldn't have been a good fit.
Yeah.
That's all. And that's really the beginning and ending of it, I think.
What I was just very unhappy about, that's what I'm focusing back, is I just felt, I know these people all signed on to do this,
Oh.
but to me, it was way too personal for me to be there. I did not want to be there in their space when they were dealing with the situation of death. That's what made me.
That was a general reaction too, and I understand that. I would prefer to interpret that these people knew what they were signing on for at some level, maybe not fully, and it's their gift to us.
Yeah.
And if we don't accept that gift with the reverence that it deserves, then we're just being dismissive of what they wanted to do for us, though they don't know us. I mean, but I understand the discomfort because we're really intimate. I mean, that last gentleman's last words virtually. I mean, what a precious thing. And it's not, we have no right to it, but he gave it. And so for us to do anything other than to honor it.
Well, and that was a gift that he gave, and very, very often, if you're privileged to be with somebody at that stage of life, you see they give you a gift. They really do.
Yeah.
You know,
And that's
Father-
something clergy have, and you work as a chaplain as well. So it's something that we're invited into that most folks aren't. And you have the same experience too. I know, Kate. So those of us who have reasons to be invited in, they're hard, they're painful, there are tears shed, and the tears are themselves precious and holy.
But the difference is we've been with them on the journey, not just all of a sudden.
Sometimes not.
Are you talking?
No, actually, that's
when
true,
you go out
too.
and take communion and things?
Well, yeah, Peggy, the
Yeah.
chaplain bit is different, but yes, when, I've been with them on their journey, so.
And it's very much, quite often, they're closer to you than they are to family members when you've been with their journey. I've been with about 6 people that are very close to death, and they weren't talking to their families, and that's tough.
Well,
But it was
I
very
think we
meaningful.
understand both the discomfort and the preciousness of it. I don't know that we need to keep going at that.
No.
I think we all understand that. I think you understand where I'm coming from, and I certainly understand where you're coming from. I think.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So, did you want to add something, Kate, or?
Just that I don't know these people that are there, but if they were as, let's say, self-absorbed as I am, they might have had an awesome time sharing that with the PBS audience, which is smaller than the CBS audience, but still. Wherever they went next, they could have been looking down and saying, wow, I got a 12 share, that's great.
Well, and difference for the doctor, or whatever she was, she knew she was being photographed. That might have made a difference in how she came across, yeah.
I was wondering, do you know if, and this is a question I should have the answer for, but I was thinking it might be interesting to have my ashes tossed into the Deschutes, and I'm wondering if that's legal.
No.
Nope,
But who's going to stop you?
Yeah, who's gonna know?
nobody's gonna stop me.
Your agent.
My sister.
Your agent.
And, you know, and you said no, and I don't, maybe you know the answers. I don't know the answer to that. I do know in Illinois, because we constructed there a columbarium, and I engaged in some conversation about what the law provided and all the rest, and I spent some time talking with the local funeral home director. And what he told me essentially was, for him, in the state of Illinois, 15 years ago, okay, so all those caveats added, but he told me that essentially he, as a funeral director, was very much constrained in what he could do with ashes. But once he let go of those to an individual, including the church, there were no constraints. And I mean, he said no constraints on what you do with ashes, and his point was that they're inert. They're absolutely inert at that point. There's no contagion, there's no risk of anything. It's just elemental, very much that way. And so that gave me great reassurance. I rather suspect that something close to that's true in Oregon too, which is to say, what you do with ashes as personal property that is inert and elemental probably isn't much regulated. Now, I tell you that without knowing it, but I'm kind of guessing that's true. If you ever wanted to use the Deschutes, I would encourage you to ask the question from somebody who actually knows. But my
That's
guess...
probably good with all questions.
Yeah, that's probably true. That's right. Next week we'll be doing estate planning, and at some point I hope Dave Carroll says you should talk to your tax advisor.
Well, I think there's a big difference between a family going out and doing that quietly, and if you had a big production with it, you know, I think you would probably garner some more difficulties.
Yeah, if we did that as after a church service here and went out to the Deschutes with 50 or 75 people, I'd probably want to ask some questions before I did that. But if you took the ashes with you after the service, I probably wouldn't think to ask anybody, and I wouldn't want to, frankly.
And I have a piece of advice for ash disposal. Check the wind direction. We had a little issue with my dad on the top of a hill in Idaho.
Take that home.
Not last week, the week before, I warned you then that the segment we watched last week was hard and painful, and I thought those were not good deaths. And I said that to also reassure you that I thought in this last segment we would see some good deaths. So I just invite you to tell me, A, if you think I got that right, and B, if you think I got that right, what's the difference? Yes, sir.
Oh, if any of you guys are ministering to me when I'm dying, remind me that I want to die like that farmer.
And why so?
Well, it seemed to me he just had accepted everything, and he saw it in perspective. Now, maybe there was a struggle before then, I don't know, but...
I would bet good
That was
money
it.
there was a struggle before that,
Yeah.
though I don't know how much.
He related it to what he did his whole life. He saw
Accepted
things-
it, part of
he
his
saw
whole
things live
life.
and die.
So there's a couple of things you're commenting on that make it presumably qualitatively good.
Well, and he told us at the end, that last sentence about life is more than, we're bigger than our individual life.
Be part of something bigger, I think is the way
Yeah.
you want to put it. Yeah. That's
I think it varies also in the way physicians or clergy persons or whoever it is in this role is verbalizing the situation. And that was what bothered me about that doctor,
Yeah, please.
because she was saying, twice she used the word worried. I'm worried that. And both times she said it very fast. I think she was really worried about the fact that she had to deliver this message, especially on the TV cameras. But for the doctor to say, I'm worried that it appears to me that you are in this kind of situation, that conveys to me that I should be worried too. And, this is something worrisome. Whereas I think if the person just says, from my perspective as a medical person, what I'm seeing in your situation is that really there's not any opportunity this is going to change a lot. And that could lead into the follow-up, and so what do we want to do about that together? How can we look at these last days?
You need to be a doctor.
Yeah.
You said that so well.
Betsy, as you were talking, before I set it up for our watching and picking up the segment where we did today, I'm realizing I should have backed up just a little bit more, because that was just before where we picked it up was the very end of that doctor's visit in her office. And what I noticed as I was resetting it was the last thing he said to her in her office as she finally reached over and gave him a hug. The last thing he said to her was, I hope you don't have to give any more bad news today.
Wow.
And that struck me because, of course, that's the reversal, right? Where he is taking care of her emotional well-being instead of her being in a position where he doesn't have to worry about that. Now, when I'm visiting with somebody, I really try to be attentive to where I am so as not to put that on the patient if I'm visiting with somebody in the hospital. And I can hear what they're having to say, not having them worry about what I'm going through. But I do have that experience with people. Well, I'm really sorry to put you through this. It's like, don't. That's the least of anybody's concern. Yeah.
I want to share an experience that we had with my dad. The doctor came out. He had surgery, and the doctor came out in this very public area and said, well, your dad's dying. I mean, he wasn't flippant about it. They said, your dad is going to die in 6 months or so, and he left. And there we were in this public setting, and nowhere to cry. And we had to go back and ask somebody, is there some place we can go? And they took us to the chapel finally, but it was poorly handled, and there was no opportunity to grieve at that moment. It was tough.
Yeah, that you're right. That shouldn't happen. I think of the ICU here, for example, where just outside the ICU room there's an open lobby, and then there's another smaller room. Usually both are being used freely by everybody, but it would be very easy for the doctor to say, could we have this room to ourselves for a few minutes and take a family in there? I'm sure they do that.
We were with Ed today, or Thursday, when he had his surgery, and it felt like the same situation. Fortunately, they were not coming out and saying he's dying, but there was no place to go there. We would have had to ask again if the surgeon had come out and given us bad news. It's a very open area.
Well, inevitably you're talking about people. I mean, doctors are people too. They're going to make mistakes, but ideally, you're right. They should find a way to pull you aside where you can have, and then give you some time, and not just walk away.
I know that nurses in many places are required to have interpersonal communication training. Doctors are not, but studies have shown that doctors who do get interpersonal communication training don't get sued as often. So, and that's what, and your story.
He left.
Your story, Rick. Your story about the doctor. When I was teaching interpersonal communication, I read the diaries of many nurses in my classes, and just horrifying stories about doctors' incompetence in being human. A lot of them are mechanics, and that's what they focus on, the mechanism, they don't focus on the totality of the human being and the human being situation. Because that's not what they're trained to do, is that sometimes they're really stupid. Because they're not trained.
Present company.
You have a
Present
doctor
company
sitting
accepted.
behind you.
But I mean, you talk about training. I mean, and Atul Gawande talks about that. And I'm sure your generation, Jerry. I mean, it's not about you personally, but I'm sure your generation, they were taught to be competent. That was first and foremost. I'm sure that's true. And as he says early on, talking about it from his own perspective, they're taught to fix, and anything short of that is a failure. And so if that's the way they're trained, it's very understandable that that's how they're going to react. And Gawande is exceptional, as we saw, and we talked about it in that first episode, where he went back and he visited with the husband of the young mother who died, and could just say, I messed up. And could just say, I lied by giving you false hope. And everybody watching it and everybody in that little room understood exactly what he meant and what the lie was and why he did it. But that's remarkable. I mean, most of us, most of us, let's not, focus on doctors, wouldn't be so willing to just admit it.
No, it's very hard work to bring somebody bad news.
Well, hard, and to be humble enough to say I messed up.
Oh yeah.
And just own that. Wow.
Well, see, I never had any, Julie could vouch for that, any interpersonal communication training. And
Is that true, Julie?
maybe,
Yeah, okay.
maybe there's more of that now, I don't know. But I think part of the problem is, in medical school at least, nobody's going to be interested in that kind of training. I mean, I want to know about chemistry and anatomy and physiology and what drugs you give and what side effects can happen, all that kind of stuff. So then, if somebody throws in a class on interpersonal communication, say, well, boy, do we need this, So I think that often probably for most people happens after they get into practice. And some people get additional training, some don't. And, hopefully if you're an oncologist or something like that, you get it a little bit more. There's specialties, where you're going to get more of that. But by and large, that's not a big part of people's training.
Do you think there's more now?
I don't know. I think it might be, but I don't know.
It might be. But you also point out that people going into the profession are going into the profession because they want to help people, they want to fix people, right?
That's the whole thing.
So, you also self-selected a little bit people who may not be necessarily as interested in being a social worker or the kind of mindset that might.
But you know what? I think that at the very end, where he doesn't see in dying, it's over. Jerry doesn't feel that way. He's always been a Christian and his beliefs are very strong. So I think even though you might not have been trained, your mind worked in a way that some people who've never walked into church, I'm not trying to put people down, but never had that hope themselves would be completely different than a physician who has that hope.
Yeah, that's fair. And that was Peggy's first observation at the end of the video. It was a recurring thought last week as we were talking about these things. But you're quite right. You're quite right.
I think personally that it's deeper than doctors. I think it's a societal thing, that we are taught that, we don't make waves, let's put it that way. And we certainly don't point out when we catch somebody, we just go along with it. We don't hold each other accountable in a way, because we don't want to be held accountable, I think is the bottom line. And so, if I'm upset with something, it's hard for me. Now, the current generation may be different, but people my age, I think, you just learn, you just suck it up and you go along. And if somebody of authority says something, whether it's right or wrong, you accept it, kind of thing. And so it's going to take a whole lot to change all of that. But maybe we are, I don't know.
I think she's right, though. I think the younger generation isn't quite that,
No, I think
acceptable.
there's a difference. yes.
yeah, because you see it a lot now. The kids are standing up and talking. Yeah.
Oh, there we are. We've come back full circle where we started with the
March
the
24th.
youth will lead us.
Perfect.
Oh, I
Thank you,
just
Tom.
forgot what I was going to say.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Well, it's time for us to be done. Next week, come back, a little bit more practical, hands-on sort of invitation for you to do a little thinking, learn a little bit about some estate planning, but still in keeping with the theme of being more.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.